This Friday, Donald Trump will meet with Vladimir Putin for a summit on the war in Ukraine. Trump has been talking of land swaps. EU leaders have not been included in the talks, neither has Ukraine. Roger Hilton is with the global think tank Globsec in Slovakia. Hi, Roger.
Good evening, Mitsumi. Good evening, Montreal.
So, Roger, Trump is not talking about getting a ceasefire agreement at this meeting. He calls it a feel-out meeting. But what about Putin? What do you think Putin is hoping for?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to state that this meeting shouldn't have happened at all. President Trump is rewarding President Putin for bad behavior. Ahead of the call on Friday, EU leaders, President Zelensky and President Trump have spoken, which is a great sign. They've agreed on a unified plan about Ukraine being at the table to negotiate. But I think nonetheless, despite this good sign, I think it's very clear that Putin will still try to realign Trump's view with what's going on in Ukraine. And specifically, I think he'll try to elevate the role of Steve Witkoff, his envoy who's been visiting Moscow, while sidelining Keith Kellogg, who was the original envoy for Russia and Ukraine in the Trump administration.
The EU and Ukraine have been meeting. They are demanding that Trump agree to some kind of red lines, as they call it, before his meeting with Putin. What would some of these red lines be?
I see three broad red lines that I need to take. Number one is representation. President Macron has said today that any land swap or territorial change must be done with Ukraine at the table, which is a good one. So representation. Territorially, what it means for Ukraine is at the moment, Russia controls 4 regions. Despite not controlling 100% of either of those regions, they still very much want to take all of the Donbass in eastern Ukraine. And the fact that they're fixated on that does not mean anything for Ukraine, given the tactical and strategic advantage it has for Russia if they were to take it to launch a future attack. It's especially also a no-go given the cost of lives and the humanitarian plight that Ukraine had to suffer to keep those. And then finally, politically, the last thing that EU wants to do is they don't want the ability for NATO membership for Ukraine to limit its size of its army. Or what's really on the wish list for President Putin is for an unlawful change of government in Kyiv that would see President Zelensky leave. So 3 broad packages of red lines.
European leaders have said that Russia represents an existential threat to the continent. Do you agree?
There's really no reason not to believe that's true. Being here for the last 10 years and seeing it almost firsthand, since the war started, Russia has been waging a very intense, very aggressive gray zone tactic strategy against it, disinformation, sabotage, miscreant influence. And backing that up also is multiple reports by intelligence from Denmark, for instance, who's claiming that once Russia's army reconstitutes, that they would be willing to launch an attack against NATO territory within 5 years. So as long as President Putin is in power, I see every reason for why European policymakers and why its military should be prepared for a range of contingencies and aggressive scenarios coming from the Kremlin.
So what scenario is it that the European leaders in Ukraine fear so much? What do they fear might come as a result of this meeting?
Well, the pendulum has swung back and forth so much in the Trump administration about where it goes on Ukraine. I think what they're most fearful is that they will leave this meeting, number one, with no prospect of a third meeting of a trilateral sit down. And the same way, the language that President Trump has been using for the last 2 weeks to issue ultimatums, I think they're fearful that, number one, those ultimatums and deadlines about having to agree to territory swaps or whatnot will be coming down on Ukraine, which seems unlikely given the news today. And then the other big red line for Ukraine moving forward. Sorry, Mitsumi, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was, what is the worst case scenario here? What do they fear that you?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I apologize about that, everybody. Yeah, so one is the ultimatums, and then one is the total disengagement of America, from interest in Ukraine. That means pulling intelligence. That means pulling arms deal, walking away from the Ramstein format, and not being a backbone of any American security guarantee for Ukraine. So as I said, those are the worst case scenarios, but given sort of where we are at the beginning of the day right now and the singing from one sheet, I think it's unlikely that Europe and Ukraine will brace for those takeaways.
At this point, Roger, do you think there's any consensus at all as to what will happen to Ukraine? I mean, is there any end in sight? What would the end be?
It's very hard to speculate. I mean, I think it would be dangerous to sort of say definitively what it's going to look like. You're going to see after the Friday meeting, the post-summit readout where we're going right now. And the hope is that there will be another summit with three people, with a trilateral summit with President Putin, President Zelensky, President Trump, and hopefully EU leaders sitting together. While that's, it's not impossible. But what is clear is like after this meeting, Russia's war of attrition will continue. They've been paying an unbelievably high cost throughout the war, but have unfortunately made some very tactical gains in the east, which are really putting a lot of pressure on Ukraine. In the lead up to the summit, they had really slowed down on their drone attacks on the city, which I'm sure will resume again. And at the other side of it, I mean, the EU is going to stand behind Ukraine. They're now industrially producing more weapons to give to Ukraine than the United States has. So it's really a piecemeal, one step at a time to see where it is. But I'm not optimistic that a strong finish will be anytime soon, and we can all hope that a ceasefire is possible, but with a lot of work to be done.
Okay. Thank you very much for this, Roger.
All the best back home.